above it.
Oh. Testing.
It's just generally not a great idea to hit expensive equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I don't know.
Smash.
This is the moonnco podcast, where we help you take back control of your well-being and regain your mental clarity. Join our growing community for resources, support, and guidance at moonnco.com. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice.
All right, what are we talking about today, Nick?
I think today we're going to talk about the Specific Carbohydrate Diet, right? And we're going to talk about how that diet was formed, originated, how it can help a various number of conditions. Essentially, this diet sort of became adopted within the IBD community, which we'll kind of talk through that more. So we plan to talk about what the SCD diet is, how it's implemented, how it was developed, the science behind it, and then also give you some insight into how we've adopted the SCD into our daily lives, the improvements we've seen, and all of that, and with the hope that we'll give you some information that, you know, maybe spark some thoughts and hopefully will help you in your journey to take control of your wellness. Because as you'll learn, it's not something that's really talked about much within the Western medical community. So I'm excited to dive into this.
Yeah, me too. So the diet was developed in 1924 by a doctor named Dr. Sidney Haas. So it was developed, like Nick said, around celiac, but then it's been applied over the years to different also inflammatory conditions, right, and had a lot of success. So the way that this really became mainstream as far as, you know, people knowing more about it was this woman named Elaine Gottschall in 1960. She went to meet with Dr. Haas with her daughter, who had been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at the age of 5, and now she was 8. So she brought her to this doctor, and they implemented the specific carbohydrate diet for her daughter, who had tried multiple medications, and they basically were the only option left that they were being given by their doctors was surgery. And so they tried the diet, and her daughter's still alive today, right? So this is 65 years later, and she still follows the specific carbohydrate diet, is what I've read, and has now, Elaine made it her life's goal to really spread that information out. So there's a book that she wrote, Breaking the Vicious Cycle, that we have, that I found this morning and read through a little bit, but it's extremely interesting. So if you have any sort of inflammatory condition like this, I would highly recommend reading this if you have any interest at all in this diet, which hopefully hopefully we can provide some insights into why it is so amazing, right? So it's this diet is 100 years old, right? So this is not new, right? This is kind of back to basics, which I think is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately with the brand, right? And with our messaging and what we're trying to communicate is, I think things have gotten really complicated when it comes to wellness of, you have to do these 7 things and don't forget these, and there's everything so complex. You could never understand it yourself, right? Like, you just need to follow all this guidance. But I think in a lot of ways we need to get back to basics, right? Like, go for a walk outside, go, eat a whole foods diet, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for us, it's been, life-changing. So I think that's where it came from, right? So the premise of it, I think, is a good next step to talk about. So the idea is that for whatever reason, right, there can be a triggering event that can cause injury to someone's GI tract. It could be a pathogen, it could be a virus. There's different things that could happen. And what happens is a buildup of bacteria in the system, right? So your intestines or your whole GI system have these little microvilli, which are like little finger-looking things that take your food and break it down and then absorb the nutrients that it needs. But sometimes things go awry, right? And these microvilli get injured and they they can't absorb things the way that they should, and they can't break food down. So our food, the carbohydrates that we eat, there's 3 different kinds, right? So there's monosaccharides, which are one single element, right? There are disaccharides, which are when there's 2 that are stuck together, and then there's polysaccharides, which is when there's a big chain, right, of the carbohydrates that are all stuck together. So if there's one, there's not really anything to break down, right? It's very simple. When it gets more complicated is when your digestive system has to do more work, right? It has to break them down into the smaller pieces before you can absorb the nutrients. So what the teachings of this book really are is that your system can no longer break down these carbohydrates properly. So if you're continuously feeding yourself, eating these things that cannot be broken down, what's going to happen? They're going to get built up in your system, and it's going to be a breeding ground for bacteria. So that becomes bacterial overgrowth, right? So now you've got all this bacteria that's stuck in your system. And bacteria is smart, right? It's not as simple as you think, that it's just, it's a living thing. And they're intelligent, and their primal instinct is to stay alive, right? So they will burrow down into your lining of your intestines and your digestive tract, and because they want to stay there and they want to stay cozy. But what does that signal to your body? Your body starts picking up on this bacteria, and so
the white blood cells are sort of going to fight this bacteria that isn't really on the surface. It's buried, and so it causes this inflammation within the muscle and tissues.
Right. So that, and when I think of it, when we started digging in and learning about this after our daughter was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, it makes a lot of sense to me, right? I mean, it makes so much sense to me that there is bacteria there that has burrowed itself down into the system, and your body is trying to eradicate it. And the more food you eat that contains these multiple chains of carbohydrates, right, the more this is going to
It gets bigger.
yeah, the more it's going to get, basically. So we started studying it, and we both were, I just went down, many rabbit holes on it, and sometimes Nick was like, I think you're losing it on this. You're so convinced on this, and
well, I think we should, but I think we should talk about that, right? Because I think it is an important factor into this whole story, right? And we haven't yet gone into, sort of our daughter getting diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and our journey in discovering this. But it is interesting in that it's not talked about as a treatment option. And there's a lot of controversy around it, right? And not controversial in the sense of, that it doesn't work, or that it's not well researched, or that it's not, scientifically sound or not healthy. But there is a lot of controversy, even within sort of the small-ish community of families with either very early onset IBD or IBD in general. Oftentimes what you're told, or at least what we were told, was diet doesn't matter. And instantly, so aside from, we get this diagnosis, we're doing some research on Google, you stumble across Breaking the Vicious Cycle, which we'll put the link to the book in the show notes for you, if you're interested. But essentially, we start going down this path, and then the doctors come in and say, okay, these are the medications that you need to take. You need to take an anti-inflammatory medication, and you need to go on immunosuppressants, and this is something that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. And basically, for both of us, I think our initial question was, well, isn't there a diet? Isn't something dietary? Isn't there something there that we can explore? Like, is it something that she can eat? And at the time, she was 10 months old. So at that time, she was just on formula. But even still, the response was, no, what you eat doesn't matter. This is just the condition that you have. This is your body's response to this, and it's an autoimmune condition. And so, essentially, you just need to manage the immune response, and that diet doesn't matter. The more we dove into it and the more we researched it and obviously implemented it within our lives, we found that diet has a huge impact, right? And I think when people hear, or at least when I heard the specific carbohydrate diet, I was really resistant to it at first because my mind went to fad diets where it's like, cut out carbohydrates and you'll be fine. And right? And like SCD is a very different thing.
So the idea is if you remove these polysaccharides and these disaccharides from the diet and are only eating monosaccharide foods, that it helps your body, right? Your body doesn't have to break things down and it can start to heal, right? Because the bacteria only lives if it keeps being fed, right? It only stays alive if it keeps being fed. So if you stop feeding the bacteria, the bad bacteria, right? Because you have good and bad bacteria. You want the good bacteria, right? But the bad bacteria you want to send packing. So if you stop feeding that bacteria, eventually, and you give your gut enough good bacteria, the balance will come back into order, right? And the good bacteria will be more prevalent and the bad bacteria will not be able to survive, right? So then the gut can heal, and once it heals and your body isn't constantly in cleanup mode of trying to combat this intruder, really, right? It can then work on normal bodily functions like absorbing nutrients and helping the body to thrive.
And I think that last point is something that's important to hit on from a conditions and symptoms standpoint. I mean, that's what we were seeing with our daughter was that she was, and at one point her diagnosis was failure to thrive,
right?
Because she was not growing, primarily because it didn't matter how much food we gave her, formula we gave her, different formulas. It did not matter.
My breast milk was like, it got to the, she was still breastfeeding too.
She not only that, like, yes, 100%, but not only that, she was breastfeeding and you went on the SCD diet. Mm-hmm. So you were eliminating polysaccharides as well. And even that, her body still wasn't able to absorb any nutrients.
Right.
Let's sort of dive in and talk about sort of implementing SCD and the stages and kind of how that goes.
Yeah, so this is the really important part and the part that we really struggled with in the beginning. But once we got it right, we saw the improvement, right? So I think where a lot of people say it's very extreme or restrictive, and in the beginning it can be. So in the beginning it's everything besides maybe bananas, right? Everything needs to be cooked, right? So it's bananas, eggs, and then really simple meats that all should be either boiled, right? In the beginning we boiled it, right? Because you really didn't even want to you really shouldn't even be using oils or anything. So you're talking chicken, beef. So we did a lot of chicken in the beginning. We don't eat a lot of beef as a family. So we did chicken, we did eggs.
Which at the time we didn't even eat chicken.
We didn't. We were pescatarian for 5 years prior to her diagnosis, or a few years prior. So for us, we were like, well, we have to give her enough nutrients, and if that includes meat, then that's fine. We're totally open to that. So in the beginning, it was banana egg pancakes, chicken and egg patties, right? Like, it's so simple. There's a chicken carrot soup that I made a lot, right? And it makes also. You make bone broth, right, which is extremely healing to the gut. So in the beginning, there's maybe 2 handfuls of things that you can eat, right? So it's simple, but the intro diet really, if you're doing it correctly and you're starting to see some improvement, only needs to last a few days, right? So once we were able to strip back everything and just start at the beginning, within a few days we were starting to see the improvement. So
and I think we could talk about that. Like, so now's a good time to kind of not transition, but kind of talk about that. Is you had mentioned that one of the challenges we faced was our daughter was 10 months old at this time, so we really we didn't have the ability to really give her solids in the same way. But to your point, we were in this weird situation, as we mentioned in a previous episode, where we were having some complications with the insurance, and we talked to our doctor, and we were fortunate enough to find a doctor, and this is another thing we'll link in the show notes, is there's resources online where you can look and you can find doctors who have actually studied. Seattle Children's Hospital has studied this extensively, and I'm not sure if they're still actively doing research on it or not, but they've done a bunch of research on it, and there are medical providers, GI specialists that have studied either in Seattle with those doctors or have or are aware of it as a treatment plan. And we found a doctor through someone we had met on social media.
Mm-hmm.
We raised it to him as a potential option, because we were, at the time we were on biologics, we were on steroids, we were on kind of like 4 or 5 different medications.
Mm-hmm.
And the main medication that they wanted to move us on, there was this issue with the insurance. And so we went to our doctor and we said, we want to try the SCD. We want to see if this makes any difference. And we were, he was like, yes, let's do it. I'm not okay with you doing that, like, let's do that in addition to the other medications. We were like, deal. Let's start there and see how it goes. And we did. The insurance, didn't approve the medications, and we had a period of, I think it was like 8 weeks or 4 weeks maybe, that we couldn't get the medication, and we were only doing SCD, and that's when we started seeing the improvement. And now, I mean, it's 3 years later, we're still, our daughter is still primarily on SCD and just absolutely thriving in every way imaginable.
So the stages, basically, as you move through them, like stage 1, really for fruits, it's, bananas, really, and I guess some grape juice. And then, okay, now you can have applesauce. But again, the fruit needs to be cooked. Then you can move on to avocado and pineapple. But again, still should be cooked, not the avocado, but the other things cooked, right? Same with vegetables. In the beginning, it's carrots. And then, okay, you can have some squash, right? So squash is okay. Potatoes are not, but we'll talk about that. There's a little asterisk there. So as you move through the stages, you could add more variety and more things as you tolerate them. And it's really important to introduce one thing at a time. And although this sounds extremely, like rudimentary, like that's a lot harder than you think.
Yes.
And that's where we struggled a bit. And talking to other parents that did it, that's where they were very, that's where their support came in, of just make sure you're doing it in the right order, right? There are things that need to be done.
And this is one of those things, 100%. And that's a great point. And it's one of those things where I hesitate to say this because I don't want it to sound like, I don't know, I can't think of the word, but you kind of have to be all in with it.
Oh yeah,
you kind of have to commit, because if you say like, okay, like I'm going to do SCD, but I'm going to start on stage 4, and I'm going to have, and even if it's
not going to work,
it's not going to work. And like, even if you're eating an extremely clean diet, even if it could be extremely clean, you could be cutting out all sugars, all polysaccharides, etc. If you don't start that intro stage and give that gut the time to heal, then you're not going to see the other benefits. And the other thing that's wild to me is this whole concept of modifying, because when we were fortunate enough to find a school that had a chef that was able to talk about dietary restrictions within our daughter's diet, and we went to talk to her about it. She was like, okay, well, what can she have and what can't she have? And we actually came up with a sheet that we developed that was like, here's the things that are SCD legal, but we know causes symptoms within our daughter. And here's things that are not SCD legal or are SCD modified that she tolerates well. So every body is different, right? And so you have to really look at how your body responds to those individual foods. And at the start, and you hit the nail on the head, at the start, it's really being diligent about documenting. And I remember you had that book where you didn't miss a beat. It was every meal, everything she consumed, how much, when we introduced things. And that was a big part of the problem in us getting her into remission, was that, and you mentioned this earlier in the episode, and I agree with it, you're constantly getting told different things, try different things. You want to fix this problem so quickly that taking a step back and controlling those variables and really taking a scientific approach to it, of saying like, okay, this week I'm going to try introducing avocado and see how that goes. This week I'm going to try Parmesan cheese. This week I'm going to try, and really being mindful about what you're introducing and documenting what those results are. And just because you see symptoms, it doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means maybe that food isn't right, and you kind of have to, it's a journey. Yeah.
So I think, there's some resources that we'll link up in the show notes too, but there's a website, pecanbread.com, that we have pulled up that we use. I mean, we still not as much now, but in the first, at least for the first year and a half, we were using it all the time. It basically takes you through each stage what is allowed at each stage. So high level, right, like we've talked about some of the things that are allowed, but generally, right, and this is goes back to the science of the polysaccharides and the disaccharides, the things that are not allowed pretty much across the board are grains and all sugars that are refined sugars, right? So anything that has sugar or artificial flavors or grains are the biggest things that are not allowed, right? So I think, and we won't go through all the details of it, but I think generally, right, like that's how we describe it to people if we're at a social gathering or a party or something and they want to know what our daughter can and can't have. And we'll talk more about that. Like, I think another whole episode could be like life on SCD, right? Because
right.
like we've traveled, we've gone internationally with her, we go on road trips with her, we go to social gatherings, right? We go and do all the things, and there's places where we know we can get by with what they offer. We know there's other places where we just have to bring our own food, right? So it is definitely a lifestyle, but one thing that the person that kind of gave us the resource that we ended up finding our GI that was supportive of this, she promoted SCD on her social media, and one of the things she posted that still sticks with me is either, like Nick said, it's a commitment, right? So either you make time to be in the kitchen cooking and preparing food, because a lot of it you do need to prepare on your own, or you make time to be in the hospital. And at first I thought it was so, it took me aback, right? Because of this, when I read it, Spencer was still in the heat of being so sick, and I remember thinking, gosh, it's so like calloused, like, I don't know, like it's not that easy. And I remember feeling like triggered by it. And now, like, I really understand what she was saying, right? Like we spend a lot of, and it's become so much part of our lifestyle that we love that, like, I'm incredibly grateful for it, because cooking as a family has become so ingrained in us, and our daughter loves it too, right? But at the time, I remember thinking that's, it's not that easy, and it's not, and I'm not saying it is always that easy, for sure, of course it's not, but for us, like, that really hit home, and now I really can understand where she was coming from, because like this is a commitment the same way committing to going for weekly, monthly infusions is, and other things, right? So it's all about what works for you and your family, for sure, but we have seen such an amazing benefit from this diet, and we feel so strongly about it now that we want to help and try to share that with other people, for sure. And I feel like we kind of just scratched the surface on it, so I'm sure, like we said, we'll have other episodes that talk about the diet, and maybe we're hoping to share some recipes, right, on our social media, and maybe we could do some, meal planning for SCD or something in the future, right? But because this is just something we feel so passionately about, but it's just one aspect of the brand, right? So hopefully this at least
you hit the nail on the head. I think, really diving in and looking at whole foods and making sure that looking at nutrition labels, right, and knowing what ingredients you're looking for and what ingredients you're trying to eliminate, and being really, like you said, making it a lifestyle. And I remember when it was just you and I, our Saturday nights were going out to eat. That's what we enjoyed doing. And now I can't imagine not doing our Saturday night and Sunday night cooking together. Like I can't imagine. Like it's such strong family bonding time. And that sounds so stupid. Like that sounds so like 1950s, but like it really is, and it really makes a big difference in our lives, and has made a huge difference in our daughter's health and in our health. And
no, I totally agree. And I think another thing that we could even have a whole episode on is we do still go out to eat, right? Like we do eat out if we're traveling, if we're on the road, but we've come up with methods of how to keep it a safe way to eat out with our daughter, right? So we do eat out still, but to Nick's point, we've limited it more because we enjoy cooking at home, and it gives us a lot less anxiety, right, if we know what she's eating, what we're eating, right? It's definitely a lifestyle, but I think we've adapted it in a way to make it manageable, and I think like this is,
and even enjoyable in a way. Like I there are some things that we found substitutes for that, and this isn't, maybe I've just not had it in so long, but there are substitutes that I actually prefer the substitute over whatever the original thing is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe we should do a whole episode on that. It's just like how we meal plan, how we do
Yeah, I
things.
agree.
Like we'll find a recipe for something. If it's not SCD, right? I'll find a normal recipe, if you will, and I'll modify it to
Right.
make it safe for her. And I mean, I think we focused a lot on ulcerative colitis and how this helps IBD, but you know, I think this diet is good for everyone, right? I mean, we're not full. You and I are not 100% compliant with SCD, but a lot of our food is, our meals are, and I think a lot of people can benefit from it, even if you don't have one of these specific ailments.
But I think that's an important point to go on, and I know we're running a little long, but that was one of my biggest sort of aversions to it, was just how drastic it seems.
Yeah.
At its surface, when you read this, this is the diet, you're like, all of my favorite things I can't eat, and how can I possibly go without whatever it is, potato chips or chocolate cake or whatever the case may be, right? And also quality of life. Like, I remember for me, like, one of the biggest hangups I had was, how is my daughter, who is, 2 years old, when she's 10, 11, 12, she's going to go to a kid's birthday party and not be able to eat pizza? Or she's not going to be able to have a slice of cake? Like, I had such a hard time wrapping my brain around that. Now that we've implemented it, I see how silly I was. Because, like, she goes to kids' parties, she has pizza, she has cupcakes. It's just we bring it for her. And so, we're very fortunate to be in a situation where, her school community knows her condition. They're very supportive of it, and there's gonna be other battles as she gets older and as she pushes the limits, and she's a very willful child, so that's going to be a battle we're gonna fight as parents. But nonetheless, the point remains that it really doesn't decrease your quality of life. You think that food is what brings you happiness and is what brings you comfort, especially when you're sick and you need that comfort and you need that soul nourishing stimulant.
Yeah.
But if you make the transition, on the other side is a lifestyle for you in which you still can enjoy your food. You can live a healthier lifestyle. You can have an increased quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, for sure.
So with that, I think we'll probably close out. We'll put a bunch of links in the show notes for you. I know we threw a lot at you in this episode. We use big terms that I still don't think I can fully say right. But I hope that we gave you some information to dive into research on. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. We offer a free initial consultation call. If you don't want to do that and you don't feel comfortable with that, just send us an email. We'll be happy to respond and start a conversation with you. We really just want to get the information out there and help people to really wrap their brains around their conditions and figure out some alternative ways. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.